On the morning of May 4th, 2026, residents of a luxury residential complex called Dom na Mosfilmovskaya in a southwestern district of Moscow woke to find a gash in the side of their building. Firefighters moved through rooms littered with debris. Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin confirmed that 5 Ukrainian drones had targeted the Russian capital between Sunday night and Monday morning. That one had struck the high-rise directly, and that there were no injuries. Russia's defense ministry said it intercepted 117 Ukrainian drones nationwide overnight. One got through. Specifically, one got through to a prominent luxury residential complex that sits across from the historic Mosfilm studio in the heart of Moscow, a building visible enough and symbolic enough that its photograph, showing a drone-carved hole in its facade, circulated globally within hours of dawn. The strike arrived 3 days before Russia's Victory Day. Parade on May 9th, at which military vehicles will not be featured for the first time in nearly 2 decades, a cancellation that Moscow attributed to security concerns amid an uptick in Ukrainian drone attacks, which is the Kremlin's way of acknowledging that the capital it is trying to project as invulnerable is not currently capable of guaranteeing the safety of armor and missiles on Red Square. That single drone hitting a Moscow skyscraper is the most visible data point in a week of military and geopolitical developments that, taken together, describe a war that is simultaneously intensifying in its aerial dimensions, fragmenting into new regional fault lines in the South Caucasus, and being reshaped by diplomatic developments in Yerevan that Russia is watching with unconcealed unease. Understanding the significance of any one of these developments requires placing it in the context of all the others, because the connections between them are not coincidental. They are structural, the product of 4 years of a war that has reorganized alliances, redefined military technology, and stretched the attention of every major power across multiple simultaneous crises whose interactions none of them fully controls. The aerial war over Ukraine in April 2026 reached a new intensity that makes the single Moscow strike look like what it is, a data point in a campaign, not an isolated event. Russia launched 6,804 long-range drones and missiles into Ukraine in April, according to Ukraine's Air Force data analyzed by ABC News, the most intense month of aerial attacks in the war's history. Ukraine's defenses intercepted approximately 88% of the incoming drones and more than 62% of the missiles. Russia's largest single attack came on the night of April 15th, when 703 munitions, 659 drones, and 44 missiles struck Ukraine simultaneously, killing at least 19 people in the deadliest single night of 2026 to date. Russia has also changed its attack timing, significantly increasing the proportion of daytime drone strikes, a tactic Ukraine's government has specifically condemned as designed to maximize civilian casualties by targeting people moving through cities during normal hours rather than sheltering at night. The UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission documented a 49% jump in Ukrainian civilian casualties in March compared to February, with at least 201 killed and 206 injured across that single month. On April 27th, a Russian drone attack on Odessa wounded 14 people, including 2 children in residential neighborhoods. The drone war that began with nighttime barrages has become a continuous feature of Ukrainian civilian life, with no hour of safety guaranteed. Ukraine's response has been proportional in volume and increasingly precise in targeting. Russia's defense ministries claimed it intercepted more than 4,700 Ukrainian drones in April alone, a figure that, if accurate, represents a volume of Ukrainian drone launches that Russia's air defense apparatus is struggling to process at scale. The Institute for the Study of War documented at least 10 confirmed Ukrainian strikes against Russian oil and gas infrastructure in the 2 weeks ending May 4th. April 26th brought a Ukrainian drone attack on Sevastopol that killed 1 man and wounded 3 others, with 3 drones shot down over the city and several homes and a dance school damaged in different neighborhoods. The same weekend, 8 people were killed in Dnipro during 20 consecutive hours of Russian strikes on the city. The aerial exchange is now symmetric in its duration and asymmetric in its economics. Russia is spending more per munition than Ukraine and losing infrastructure that is harder to replace, while Ukraine is losing civilian lives at a rate that its government is publicly documenting as a war crimes record. The Victory Day parade cancellation of military vehicles is a detail that deserves more analytical weight than it has received in most coverage. Victory Day, May 9th, is the most sacred date in Russia's political calendar, the commemoration of the Soviet Union's defeat of Nazi Germany, the ritual around which Putin has constructed his entire narrative of Russianism, historical greatness and national purpose. The parade on Red Square is its centerpiece. Tanks, missiles, armored personnel carriers, artillery systems moving through the capital in a display of military power that Putin has used year after year to project an image of Russian military invulnerability. The decision to remove military vehicles from the parade, officially attributed to security concerns, is an acknowledgement that the Ukrainian drone threat to Moscow has reached a level at which the Russian military cannot guarantee the security of its own hardware during its most politically important public event. The armor is not rolling because it might be attacked. In front of cameras, on Red Square, on May 9th. That is the level of strategic exposure that the Ukrainian drone campaign has created for Putin's most symbolically charged annual event. While Moscow was absorbing a drone strike and preparing a degraded Victory Day parade, Yerevan was hosting a diplomatic convergence of historic proportions. The 8th European Political Community Summit convened in Armenia on May 4th, with European Council President Antonio Costa and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen representing the EU. French President Emmanuel Macron was expected on May 5th, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, whose presence was described by Armenian and regional media as potentially the most significant diplomatic development of the summit, was expected to attend and meet with Armenian leadership. The most consequential potential agenda item was military technical cooperation in unmanned aerial systems, specifically the transfer of Ukraine's combat-proven drone expertise to Armenia. The Armenian media outlet reporting Zelenskyy's possible visit noted that Azerbaijani analysts were already describing Yerevan's procurement of drones as preparation for a rematch in a drone war. Zelenskyy's attendance in Yerevan would simultaneously constitute the most significant step in Ukraine's drone diplomacy campaign and the most direct signal to Moscow that Russia's nominal ally, Armenia, was completing its pivot toward the West. The Armenia-Azerbaijan peace process, mediated by President Trump and producing the August 2025 Washington Declaration, provides the geopolitical backdrop against which this diplomatic gathering is occurring. President Aliyev of Azerbaijan participated in the European Political Community Summit via video link, stating that we have been living in peace for only 9 months and we are learning to live in peace. Prime Minister Pashinyan of Armenia credited the EPC forum with playing a crucial role in establishing peace between Azerbaijan and Armenia. 9 months of peace between two countries that fought 3 wars, 1988 to 1994, 2020, and a near resumption in 2022, represents a genuinely fragile achievement. The obstacles to a permanent settlement are structural. Azerbaijan is demanding that Armenia change its constitution to remove language it reads as implying territorial claims on Azerbaijani territory, a change that requires a referendum that cannot be held before 2027 after parliamentary elections, in which Pashinyan's low poll ratings create genuine uncertainty about whether the political will to complete the peace process survives a change of government. RAND Europe's analysis of the situation noted that Baku may adopt a more bellicose stance if the constitutional amendment process is delayed, and that Russia's potential actions to influence the June 2026 Armenian parliamentary elections could undermine American and Western influence and derail the peace agreement, whose existence is the primary reason Armenia is now hosting the European Political Community Summit. The Iran war's spillover into the South Caucasus adds a dimension to Armenia's situation that the peace process coverage consistently underweights. On March 5, 2026, a drone launched from Iranian territory struck the airport and a school in Azerbaijan's Nakhchivan exclave, a day after President Aliyev had visited the Iranian embassy in Baku to offer condolences for Khamenei's death. The incident triggered sharp rhetoric on both sides, before de-escalating after direct presidential contact. The Carnegie Endowment documented that Iranian refugees were already crossing into Armenia through the Megri border crossing in March 2026, adding humanitarian and economic pressure to a country still managing the consequences of the 2023 Karabakh exodus. Azerbaijan, paradoxically, stands to benefit economically from the Iran war. A sustained $20 to $25 rise in Brent crude generates an annual export windfall of approximately $6 to $7.5 billion for Baku's oil-dependent economy. The country that signed a peace agreement with Armenia and Washington in August 2025 is simultaneously profiting from the regional war that is generating refugees crossing into its former adversary's territory. Russia's relationship with Armenia has been deteriorating with accelerating momentum since 2022, and the EPC summit in Yerevan on May 4th represents the most visible public expression of that deterioration to date. Moscow remains Armenia's military ally on paper. CSTO membership, Russian troops formerly stationed in the country, Russian supplied weapons in the Armenian military inventory. In practice, Russia twice declined to provide military assistance when Azerbaijan conducted military incursions into Armenian territory in 2021 and 2022. Russia's peacekeeping forces in Nagorno-Karabakh withdrew in May 2024, completing a disengagement that left the territory fully under Azerbaijani control. Armenia is now seeking Western alternatives for its security architecture with a speed that has surprised even optimistic analysts of Armenian foreign policy. The VBAT reconnaissance drones purchased from Shield AI in February 2026 for $11 million are the most recent hardware evidence of that pivot. Zelenskyy's potential arms cooperation discussion in Yerevan, if it produces a framework agreement on drone technology transfer, would be the most consequential single step in Armenia's security reorientation, and the development that Moscow has been trying hardest to prevent through its influence operations in Armenian domestic politics. Virtual Project Freedom, the third element of this week's military summary designation, refers to the broader information architecture that each side in the Russia-Ukraine war is deploying to shape the cognitive environment in which military outcomes are interpreted. Russia's continued denial of the Mosfilm drone strike's significance, official statements emphasizing interception numbers, while photographs of the building's damaged facade circulated on every major media platform globally, illustrates the specific failure mode of information warfare when physical evidence contradicts the official narrative immediately and irreversibly. The drone hit the building. The building is in Moscow. The photographs exist. No intercept count changes those facts. And attempting to manage the narrative around them while the images are circulating produces a credibility cost that accumulates with each similar incident. Ukraine's information strategy around the same event is almost the inverse. Release the footage, note that it is 3 days before Victory Day, point out that the military vehicles are not going to be on Red Square this year, and let the juxtaposition do the analytical work. 3 indicators will define the trajectory of the specific developments documented in this May 4th military summary. First, whether Zelenskyy's Yerevan visit, if confirmed, produces a concrete framework agreement on drone technology transfer to Armenia, because the strategic significance of Ukraine's drone expertise reaching a South Caucasus state that shares borders with Russia and Iran and sits at the intersection of competing great power interests extends far beyond the bilateral Armenia-Ukraine relationship. Second, whether Russia's decision to remove military vehicles from the May 9th Victory Day parade signals a broader operational acknowledgement that Ukrainian drone capabilities have reached a threshold at which major Russian military hardware is no longer safe at public events in the Russian capital, and whether that acknowledgement affects the political calculus around the ceasefire proposal that Putin has made for May 9th, which Kyiv has not committed to accepting. Third, whether the April record of 6,804 Russian drone and missile launches into Ukraine, met by an 88% interception rate, and a corresponding record of Ukrainian deep strikes into Russian territory, represents the peak intensity of the aerial war or the new operational baseline, because if it is the baseline, the trajectory for the months ahead is a mutual aerial campaign of unprecedented scale, conducted simultaneously with an intensifying ground war, a contested ceasefire framework, and a diplomatic realignment in the South Caucasus that is rewriting the security architecture of the former Soviet space in real time. The Dom na Mosfilmovskaya building that absorbed a Ukrainian drone on May 4th is not a random target or an accidental waypoint. It is a building in a city that Russia's propaganda apparatus has consistently presented as invulnerable, surrounded by the layered air defense of the most defended airspace in Russia, in a week when that airspace was on heightened alert specifically because of May 9's approach. The building's prominence, a luxury high-rise complex visible from major roads in the Mosfilm district, associated with the cultural landmark of the Soviet film studio across the street, makes it the kind of target whose damage produces images that circulate globally without requiring any commentary from Ukraine's Information Operations Directorate. The strike does not need to be described as significant. The photographs describe it. 117 Russian drones intercepted overnight. 1 Ukrainian drone reaches central Moscow and carves a hole in a building that becomes a photograph on every major media platform on the planet, before Russian officials have finished issuing their interception statistics. The ratio of 1 through to 117 is Russia's air defense performance. The ratio of 1 image to every other narrative is the information warfare result. The ground war context against which all of this aerial intensity is unfolding adds a dimension that this week's headline developments can obscure. Russia's forces have been advancing along the front line in northeastern Ukraine, according to the Institute for the Study of War's analysis of geolocated evidence from the period. The advances are incremental, measured in hundreds of meters in most sectors, but they are occurring on a front line where Ukraine's manpower constraints have been visible since late 2025. 50,000 unmanned ground vehicles that Zelenskyy announced in April, the drone production surge, the Sting interceptor program, the Deep Strike Energy campaign, all of these are being developed in the context of a ground war in which Ukraine is absorbing Russian pressure on the front line with a human cost that its government acknowledges is unsustainable at current. Rates without either a ceasefire, a negotiated settlement, or a technological substitution of machines for soldiers at a scale that has not yet been achieved. Putin's proposed May 9th ceasefire 3 days away from this writing, announced with the Victory Day parade as its symbolic frame, is being read by Ukrainian analysts as a tactic rather than a genuine offer. A pause that would allow Russian forces to consolidate recent gains, rest and resupply units that have been under continuous pressure, and resume operations after the ceasefire lapses from a more advantageous position. Ukraine's non-commitment to accepting it reflects exactly that analysis. The Zelenskyy visit to Yerevan, if confirmed, would make May 4th, 2026, a date remembered in 3 separate theaters simultaneously: the day a drone hit Moscow's Mosfilm district, the day the European political community convened in a former Soviet state that is completing its pivot toward the West, and the day Ukraine's drone diplomacy reached the South Caucasus in person. The convergence of those 3 events on a single calendar date is not a coincidence arranged for dramatic effect. It is the product of a war that has been reshaping European security for 4 years and is now extending its gravitational influence into regions that the pre-2022 analysis would not have placed in the same strategic frame as Ukraine and Russia. Armenia's decision to host the EPC summit, to invite Zelenskyy, to buy American reconnaissance drones, and to discuss Ukrainian drone technology, while simultaneously maintaining the CSTO membership and Russian military relationships it has not yet formally terminated, is a country navigating its own version of the strategic choice that every state on Russia's periphery has been forced to make since February 2022. Calculate what the neighborhood looks like after this war ends, and position accordingly. Yerevan has made its calculation. The EPC summit is where it is announcing the result. What the week of May 4th through May 9th, 2026 will be remembered as, in the military history of the Russia-Ukraine war, in the diplomatic history of the South Caucasus, and in the information history of how wars are narrated in the era of ubiquitous imagery, is not yet determined. The Victory Day parade without armor on Red Square has not happened yet. The Zelenskyy-Pashinyan meeting has not been confirmed or conducted yet. The May 9th ceasefire proposal has not been accepted or rejected yet. But the drone that hit Dom na Mosfilmovskaya in the hours before this summary was written has already happened, and its photograph exists, and it sits 3 days before the parade that is supposed to demonstrate Russian military power, and the tanks and missiles that were supposed to roll through Red Square are not rolling, because the country that built them cannot guarantee their safety in its own capital from an adversary that, 4 years ago, had no drones and no missiles, and was asking the world for anti-tank rifles and helmets. That trajectory is the war. Everything else is the details. The economic dimension of the aerial war's current intensity is one that neither side's public communications fully acknowledges, but that both are managing as a primary strategic constraint. Russia's monthly drone production, the Geran 2 manufacturing capacity that Russia built with Iranian technical assistance and has been scaling through facilities in Alabuga and Tatarstan, among other locations, has been directly targeted by Ukrainian strikes. The April 2025 attack on the Alabuga Special Economic Zone struck Shahed production infrastructure at approximately 1,700 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. Ukraine's Institute for the Study of War assessed that those strikes, combined with subsequent targeting of the same facilities, imposed production delays that affected Russia's ability to sustain the volume of attacks it had been conducting. Russia compensated by increasing the proportion of smaller, cheaper drones in its attack waves and supplementing them with a reduced number of expensive cruise missiles, precisely the tactical shift that Ukraine's Air Force data for April 2026 reflects in the composition of its nightly intercept reports. The record 6,804 munitions of April include a higher drone-to-missile ratio than any previous record month, indicating Russia is substituting toward its cheaper and more producible option as its cruise missile inventory is consumed faster than it is replaced. Ukraine's production economics are moving in the opposite direction. Every month of continued domestic drone manufacturing at the scale Ukraine has achieved, 5 million FPV drones per year, hundreds of long-range strike drones per day from Firepoint alone, 10,000 Sting interceptors per month from Wild Hornets, is a month in which Ukraine's manufacturing capacity grows while Russia's is being targeted and constrained simultaneously. The $300 million German investment package announced in April 2026, specifically for Ukrainian deep strike capabilities, and the European drone co-production partnerships with Lithuania, Norway, and Germany that are beginning to deliver volume increases at external industrial capacity to Ukraine's own production. The asymmetry that Putin calculated in February 2022, that Russia's larger economy and larger military-industrial base would eventually overwhelm Ukraine's smaller and more fragile production capacity, has not materialized. Ukraine's per-unit production costs are lower, its iteration cycles are faster, its feedback loop between combat experience and manufacturing adjustment is shorter, and its Western financial support has prevented the economic collapse that Russian strategy anticipated. The drone war that Russia planned to win quickly and Ukraine survived long enough to develop its own version of is now a war that Ukraine is conducting at record volume, while simultaneously running an intensifying offensive campaign against Russian oil infrastructure, energy logistics, and defense manufacturing. The May 4th through May 9th window is, in this context, a compressed summary of everything the war has become: drones over Moscow, diplomacy in Yerevan, a parade without tanks, a ceasefire proposal without acceptance, and a Ukrainian president whose itinerary in a single week covers a European political community summit in a former Soviet republic, potential military agreements with Russia's nominal ally, and the ongoing management of a country absorbing 6,000 plus incoming attacks per month, while launching its own record offensive campaign against Russian territory. Each of those elements is individually significant. The week in which they coincide is a data point in a war that, 4 years after Russia launched what it expected to be a 72-hour operation, has become something that neither side predicted. Both are managing imperfectly, and the world is watching determine the shape of the European security order for the next generation.